Let me say something that might make people uncomfortable. Fraud in nonprofits is not rare, it's just underreported. And it doesn't usually happen because someone set out to be unethical. It happens because organizations rely too heavily on trust and not enough on structure. And if you think that would never happen in our organization, there are entire headlines that say otherwise.
You're listening to the Off Balance Podcast, where faith, family, and business collide. Hosted by Brooks Deming, Doctor of Business Administration, business coach, and resilience expert. Each episode features real-life conversations to help entrepreneurs like you build resilience and lead with confidence.
Welcome back to Off Balance. I'm your host, Dr. Brooks. This podcast is for leaders, entrepreneurs, and organizations that want clarity, structure, and sustainability. Today, we're talking about fraud in nonprofits, what it looks like, why it happens, and how to prevent it. Because the reality is, some of the biggest nonprofit scandals didn't happen in disorganized, struggling organizations. They happened in organizations that were well known, well funded, and mission driven. Think about the case involving Feeding Our Future. This organization was at the center of one of the largest pandemic related fraud schemes in the United States. Millions of dollars meant to feed children were allegedly misused. And here's what stood out to me. This wasn't a situation where no money was flowing. There was funding, there were programs, and there were visibility. But there were also weak oversight, gaps in verification, and systems that couldn't keep up with the scale. So during COVID, the federal government expanded child nutrition programs throughout the United States Department of Agriculture. Nonprofits could sponsor meal distribution sites. They would be reimbursed for feeding children, especially those in underserved areas. The more meals served, the more reimbursement they would receive. But what happened was, instead of feeding kids at scale, many individuals and groups exploited the system. So the core scheme was fake meal sites were created, inflated or completely fabricated meal counts were reported, fake attendant rosters and invoices were submitted. Money was reimbursed by the government based on those false claims. So basically, what happened was Feeding Our Future, they acted as a sponsoring organization, which means they approved meal sites, they submitted reimbursement claims to the state, and they were responsible for oversight. But the issue, prosecutors alleged the organization approved clearly suspicious vendors, ignored red flags, and continued submitting inflated claims. Who was involved? Over 70 individuals were charged, which is why it's one of the largest fraud indictments in U.S. history. It included nonprofit leaders, site operators, and business owners. Some defendants lived extremely lavish lifestyles. They had luxury homes, cars, they were taking luxury vacations, and allegedly all with stolen funds, right? So how much money was stolen? It's an estimated 250 million in fraudulent claims. So to put that in perspective, that's money intended to feed children during a national crisis. And it was uncovered because the Federal Bureau of Investigations and federal prosecutors began investigating after there were an unusual spike in meal claims, whistleblower concerns, and financial patterns that didn't match what was happening within the organization. And so this led to raids, arrests, and ongoing trials that started in 2022. And so what is happening now? We're in 2026, right? There are multiple convictions and guilty pleas. There's an ongoing trial for the remaining defendants, and there were also asset seizures like home, cash, and businesses. And so what we're going to talk about today is the key failures that allowed this to happen within this organization. They had weak oversight during the crisis. They had over-reliance on self-reporting. They had lack of segregation of duties, and they ignored red flags. So this wasn't just about people doing the wrong thing. It was about a system that made it easy to do the wrong thing. A second organization that we can look at that was tied to a scandal was the Wounded Warrior Project. While not criminal fraud in the same way, it raised serious questions about spending practices, executive accountability, and transparency with donors. And after the trust issues arose with this organization, donors' donations dropped significantly. So here's the point: it doesn't take theft to damage credibility. A lack of transparency alone can also do that within an organization. So when we talk about fraud and ethics, we're not just talking about legal risk, we're talking about trust risk. And once trust is broken in a nonprofit, it's very hard to rebuild. Fraud in nonprofits often come down to three things. One, overtrust. People assume they've been doing it forever. They would never do that. And so what happens is they don't have a control system. They are basically running off of a hope strategy. The second thing is a lack of segregation of duties. One person collects money, records transactions, reconciles accounts. So we have a lack of efficiency, which opens the nonprofit up to exposure. The third thing is a weak or inactive board. A board that don't review financials, don't ask questions, don't understand what they're looking at. And so there is a lack of governance. So basically, we just have rubber stamping going on. So here's what fraud looks like: scheming or cash theft, expense reimbursement fraud, payroll fraud, vendor fraud, misuse of restricted funds. And here's what's important: most fraud is not complex, it's repetitive, small, and unnoticed over time. So those small amounts of money over time, it adds up. And fraud doesn't just appear, it actually leaves signals. So, some things that you can watch for are delays in financial reporting, resistance to sharing records, one person controlling everything, missing documentation, lifestyles that don't match income. And one of the biggest red flags is they never want to step away, because if no one else touches the process, no one else can question it. So if you have someone that is adamant that they reconcile or always adamant that they count, whatever the case is, question that and put things in place, checks and balances that can help alleviate that. So I'm going to give you a few tips as it relates to structure. The first thing is segregation of duties, separate money handling, recording, and approval. Number two, dual approvals. No significant transaction should rely on one person. Three, monthly financial review. And you want to have questions. This is not the time to be silent. When the finances are reviewed, ask your questions. Number four, independent reviews or audits. This can be done internally, or you can hire a third party company to come in and do an audit or review. Number five, written financial policies. Number six, mandatory time off and role rotation. It's so important to take time off and to shut things down and then rotate those roles. And number seven, every nonprofit needs a whistleblower policy. There is a leadership responsibility when it comes to oversight of a nonprofit. So it's not about assuming that people are unethical. It's about understanding that good people plus weak systems equals risk. So you want to have strong systems in place, because strong systems, they protect your mission, your donors, your reputation, and your people. So if you're listening and you're thinking, we don't have these systems in place, this is your signal, not to panic, but to get structure. Because the organizations in those headlines, they didn't think it would happen to them either. And this is exactly what we address in the Business and HR Clarity Audit. We assess your structure, your oversight, your decision making gaps, and your risk exposure. So you can lead with clarity and protect what you've built. The link to book is in the description of this episode. Before we close, I want you to sit with this for a second. Most nonprofit leaders are doing meaningful work. They care about the mission, they care about the people they serve. But caring about the mission and protecting the mission are not the same thing. And that's where a lot of organizations get caught off guard, because nothing feels wrong until something is. And by the time it shows up, you're not just dealing with a process issue, you're dealing with trust, reputation, and impact. So this isn't about assuming the worst about people. It's about being honest about systems. It's asking, if something were off in our organization today, would we catch it? Not eventually, not after the damage is done, but early enough to protect what you built. That's the level of clarity real leadership requires. And the organizations that sustain their impact over time are the ones that are willing to ask those questions before they are forced to answer it.
Thanks for listening. Please rate this episode and share it with your family and friends. To learn more about your host or to book a coaching session, visit www.brooksdeming.com. Until next time, rise.